All right, as quickly as possible, I want to talk about the sixth seal, and I want to talk about the seventh trumpet, the wedding of the bride of Christ, the consummation of the bride of Christ, the great wedding in the air, that is the heavenly places, the spiritual realm, the same air that at one point in time Satan was said to be the power of, or to be the prince of the air, that is the spiritual realm. Remember, right? We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against authorities, principalities, powers of the air. The spiritual realm is where these battles take place and is the far more important realm than any physical realm. And I want to discuss this for a moment. Let's look at the sixth seal right here. When you open the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth. The moon became like blood. The stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken up by a gale. All right, that's enough to get this point across. Let's look at Luke 21, because Jesus mentions this sixth seal in his Olivet Discourse. Let's look at verse 25. And there will be signs in the sun and moon and stars, and on the earth distress of nations and perplexity because of the roaring of the sea and the waves, people fainting with fear and foreboding what is coming on the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now when these things begin to take place, straighten up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. That's important. So when they were to see the signs of the sixth seal, they knew their redemption was drawing near. All right, now let's talk about the 144,000 with that information in mind. The first introduction to the 144,000 is in, well, you know what? It actually immediately follows this sixth seal. Oddly enough, right there in Revelation 7. After this, I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on the earth or sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun with the seal of the living God. And he called with a loud voice to the four angels who had been given power to harm earth and sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. And I won't go through and read all those. Okay. What is the seal? Here in this book of Revelation, with highly apocalyptic and metaphoric and visual language, it says on their foreheads. But we know from the book of Ephesians that we are sealed with the Holy Spirit. Now there's 12,000 from each of these tribes. I don't personally believe that this has to be specifically 144,000 on the dot. 12 is God's number of organizational entirety, which is very provable with the Bible, and 1,000 means perfect or all, like he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, for example. So what we have here, what is being said to me, is that entirely all of the sealed by the Holy Spirit, born again Jewish believers from every tribe. That is the group that is being described here. Entirely all of the born again, sealed by the Holy Spirit, Jewish believers. That is what we see. Now, this same group reappears in Revelation 14, because Revelation is recapitulatory. It repeats itself over and over again, drives home points, gives you more details and the whys behind the whats. Let's look at them in Revelation 14. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps, and they were singing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. Okay, we see a little bit more here. These 144,000 in Revelation 14 are pictured as having been redeemed. So, this is let's read on. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that these are men? No. Throughout the entirety of the Bible, and especially in Revelation, you have the idea of spiritual harlotry, spiritual adultery, those who would cheat on God or cheat on Christ. When it says they had not defiled themselves with women, that means they had not left the true God and the true religion, but they had stayed faithful as a virgin, betrothed spiritually to their bridegroom, faithfully awaiting their redemption. Let's go on. These have been redeemed from mankind as firstfruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. You see, when the Holy Spirit seals us, we become blameless before God, the ultimate judge. So, the 144,000, to review, are Jewish Christians sealed with the Holy Spirit, faithful to God, and they become redeemed and therefore blameless before the judge in this day of Christ, day of salvation, day of redemption, the ultimate Yom Kippur. Now, let's look at Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 1. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers. So who is the writer of Hebrews speaking to? Jews. But in these last days, the last days of what? The last days of the Jewish age, the last days of the Old Covenant, the last days of the Mosaic Law, the last days of the temple. But in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom he also created the world. The writer of Hebrews is saying he's in the last days, and there's going to be a switch of the spiritual system. Let's look at Hebrews 6. So that by two unchangeable things it is impossible for God to lie. He's talking about the two witness idea of the Jewish judicial system, if you will. And what do we see in Revelation? Two witnesses. What is described? The actions of Elijah and Moses. Well, what do Elijah and Moses represent? The prophets and the law. Okay? We who have fled for refuge. Well, what did they flee from? Well, they had fled from the flogging in the synagogues and the murdering of their fellow Christians that Jesus said would happen and would be a sign that their redemption was about to take place, right? He is seeing the unfolding of what was prophesied in the Olivet Discourse. We who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. Well, why did they flee? Because Jesus told them to flee. He said, when you see this stuff going down, flee to the Judean mountains. Let's go on. Hebrews 8. In speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. So what is becoming obsolete? The first covenant. And he says it's ready to vanish away. You see, the disciples rightly connected the destruction of Herod's temple to the consummation of the age. They knew that this was the time of Reformation, which the writer of Hebrews also calls the consummation of the age, the time of Reformation. Look here in Hebrews 12. This is what's really, really cool. For you, who is that? He's speaking to Jewish first fruit, first century Christians who had left Dodge. They got out of Dodge. They got out of Judea and Jerusalem and fled to the Judean mountains. And look what the writer of Hebrews says about his audience. For you have not come to what may be touched. Pause right there. They've come to something spiritual, something better than what can be physically touched. A blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them. Well, what's he talking about? He's talking about that earlier revealing of God's presence at Sinai with the very giving of the law and the old covenant, that spiritual system which he said was about to vanish away. Look at verse 20. For they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble in fear. Now, that's a big parenthetical description and relating back to the first presence of God that brought the law on Mount Sinai. And now he compares that. Look here in verse 22. But you, who's you? It's the people he's writing to. First century, first fruit, Jewish Christians. And a Christian is sealed by the Holy Spirit. Verse 22, but you have come to Mount Zion. Oh, interesting. They've not come to what can be touched, but they've come to something better. You have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. And, catch this, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Wow. He just told first century, first fruit, Jewish Christians who are faithful to God and faithful to Jesus that they had come not to a spiritual place, not to a physical place, but to a spiritual place that could not be touched, Mount Zion, the heavenly Jerusalem. And he calls them the firstborn enrolled in heaven. And to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. And how are we made perfect in God's sight? God, the ultimate judge. Well, through the sealing of the Holy Spirit. That is the audience that the writer of Hebrews is speaking to. Now let's go back to Revelation 14, verse 1. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps, and they were singing a new song before the throne, and before the 4 living creatures, and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as firstfruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. Ladies and gentlemen, Hebrews was written to the 144,000.